And good evening. It's October 17th already, 2023. In this Outside the Class series, we're continuing a study of a person that has fascinated me since I picked up the Bible, Jonah. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the amazing Jonah source videos up for review. The purpose of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first. That would be in the source video playlist. Because with this way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. We still hope to keep these around 15 to 20 minutes or so, because we really want to make them easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So, we're continuing our amazing Jonah series with When God Loves Your Enemies. And this is part 2 of 3 on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kind of podcasts useful, then click the subscribe button, because the reminders, they're just there to help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, then click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. Yeah? Okay, so the amazing Jonah, God Loves Your Enemy, part 2. Okay, so Tim shared a story about Gordon Wilson. I highly suggest that you, if you have not yet, please give it a listen. If you have, give it a re-listen. I'll give you the brief version. Wilson was living in Ireland during the active 80s, in a time of great strife between Britain and Ireland. If you know some history, it shouldn't be a surprise to you. In 1987, Gordon was with his family, and he went back to a memorial remembrance of British soldiers that were lost during the 2 Great World Wars. During that service, a number of bombs that were planted by the IRA went off, killing a number of people. He and his daughter were trapped under debris for a number of hours. They were eventually liberated, but his daughter, she did not survive the night. William Thomas, in his book, The Third Side, Why We Fight and How Can We Stop, Thomas captures part of an interview that Wilson gave after the bombing from the hospital. No one who heard Gordon Wilson will ever forget what he said in that interview. His grace towered over the miserable justification of the bombers. Speaking from his hospital bed, Wilson described his last conversation with his daughter. She held my hand tightly. She gripped me as hard as she could. She said, "Daddy, I love you very much." These were her exact words to me, and those were the last words I ever heard her say. But then, to the astonishment of the listeners, Wilson went on to add, "I will bear no ill will. I will bear no grudge. Bitter talk is not going to bring her back to life. I will pray tonight and every night for the men who did this, and that God will forgive them." No words in more than 25 years of violence in Northern Ireland had such a powerful and emotional impact. But the story gets even more amazing. A year after the bombing, Gordon, he held a public meeting and invited the IRA to be part of it. And in that meeting, he forgave them and he begged them to stop the violence. A later president of the Irish Republic, Mary McLeish, she captured this in her book, Love in Chaos. Gordon's words shamed us all and caught us off guard. They sounded so different from what we had expected and what we had all become so used to. They brought a stillness with them. They carried a sense of the transcendent into a place that had become so ugly we could hardly bear to watch. Gordon, he had his detractors, and unbelievably, he even received bags of hate mail. How dare you forgive? The people demanded. What kind of father are you who can forgive your daughter's killers? It was as if Gordon has spoken those words of forgiveness for the first time in human history, as if Christ had never uttered the words, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. There was one outstanding critic, one who was a Christian, and she said to me about Gordon Wilson, surely the poor man must have been in shock, as if offering love and forgiveness is a sign of mental weakness instead of spiritual strength. So as Tim put it, there's a scandalous side to this when God's mercy and grace begins to include those that we despise, or at least ones who've wronged us, ones that we don't think deserve it. This is really, really disturbing, this grace thing. And yet, this is what the scroll of Jonah is what it's all about. Because the actions of Jonah are not surprising to us, really. We see ourselves all over this. Those detractors from Gordon Wilson. What more can we learn from this story as we continue into chapter 4? Did you catch this? Because I know I wasn't paying attention. That God tries 3 times to bring Jonah along, to shift his thinking, to understand. He wants Jonah to understand his grace in a new way. At verse 4, so Yahweh replied, let's talk about this, Jonah. Is it right for you to be angry? Jonah, he just stonewalls God. Because I see it more like a kid stomping off. He's pouting. He's turning around, walking away, arms crossed. So he stomped off. Eastbound, I might add. He built a shelter. He sat under it in the shade. And he waited for whatever was going to happen. Because Jonah, I think he's waiting to see some kind of fire and brimstone event. That's just not going to happen. Because maybe Jonah, he's going to sit there for those 40 days, waiting for his sabotaged prophetic message, waiting for it to expire. And he's going to hope for the worst, his hapak. Jonah does what he did in the beginning. Really, he ignores God. This is our over-the-top prophet, again, ignoring God. So Tim digs into that word that Jonah called out, the Hebrew word hapak. And we get 3 references to that. This word hapak, it's in Hosea 7:8, Lamentations 4:6, and Psalm 30:11. Often with Hebrew, with the basics of words, they tend to have a tangible nature, as it were. So hapak, turned over, like in Hosea. Ephraim mixes himself with the nations, and Ephraim has become like a cake, not turned hapak. Like bread, like it wasn't flipped, like it's ruined. Then we have hapak as in overthrown or destroyed, right? It's one of Lamentations. For the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the sin of Sodom, which was overthrown, hapak, as in a moment, and no hands were turned toward her. As in Sodom was overthrown or destroyed in a day. Then we have hapak. It's changed, transformed. It's in Psalms. You have turned, hapak, for me, my mourning into dancing. You have loosed my sackcloth and girded me with gladness. So which hapak is Jonah expecting, or rather wanting. Clearly number 2. But which hapak is God intending and what actually happens? Clearly number 3. As Tim put it, this is a cool, funny wordplay. But does Jonah think it's funny? Nope. He's ticked. So does the hapak, does it happen? Because hapak really does. So maybe there's a question we can ask. Are we willing to see God's way, his hapak? Jonah tried to use God's words against him. And God, he actually did use Jonah's words, but in a different way than Jonah intended or expected. And Jonah, he's just thinking, how dare God twist my hapak? So the direct reasoning with Jonah didn't work. So maybe God goes the indirect route. He comes at Jonah again, right? Now he takes a different tack. He uses nature in his lesson, that small plant tactic, right? Because he causes a plant to grow up enough to shade and cover him during the day. Jonah takes notice of this plant and that God has provided it, adding to his comfort. God, he got Jonah's attention. So now, time to send in the worm. I like Tim's point that God brought up a huge storm, a big fish, a medium-sized plant, and a small worm. I'm not really surprised. It's very appropriate in this satirical role, this satirical role-flipping story of Jonah. But the worm, he does his job. The plant, it withers, and the scorching sun and easterly wind swarm up. I find a bit of irony here, because Jonah, he's wanting destruction, and of course pictures of Sodom and Gomorrah are probably swirling in our heads. Maybe his too. But now, Jonah gets the heat. And now, he wants to die again. The audience is listening. And the point, probably not lost on them. But for them, maybe almost comical. There's a bit more to chew on. So we'll pick this up next week with our finale with this, with our part 3. The finale and that scandalous grace and mercy. And thanks for being with us tonight on another edition of Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet.